mynews.studio.
A record 80% of countries are on track to reduce poverty next year. But the question is, will this progress actually reach the places with the deepest need?
It's February 9th, 2026. The World Bank is projecting something we haven't seen in more than a decade. By 2025, 80% of countries worldwide are expected to see poverty rates fall. That's quite a shift from the setbacks during the pandemic, isn't it?
That's right. And it's not just the wealthier countries moving the needle. We're seeing 75% of low-income nations and about 70% of countries dealing with conflict or fragility making gains. Quite a turnaround from the COVID period, when poverty was actually rising almost everywhere.
What's behind this kind of recovery? Is it a bounce-back effect from the pandemic? Or are there deeper changes at work?
There are a few main factors. First, global inflation has finally stabilized after the big shocks in 2022 and 2023. That's made food and basics more affordable in a lot of places. Second, there's actually been a slight decrease in the number of active conflicts, which lets countries redirect resources from crisis response to development. And third, disaster response has improved, not just emergency aid, but early warning systems and stronger social safety nets.
But if the overall numbers are getting better, why does the new World Bank poverty line revision show a rise in people living in extreme poverty? That seems like a contradiction.
Good catch. In June 2025, the World Bank raised the international poverty line from $2.15 to $3 per day. This uses updated purchasing power and new data, especially from India and over 60 middle-income countries. So more people are counted as poor now, even though their day-to-day lives might not have changed immediately.
Just to make sure I understand, the higher poverty line is about what? Higher living costs or a broader understanding of what people need?
Both. It's about covering what people truly need: nutrition, shelter, social participation, based on the latest data. For example, when the new line was introduced in 2022, it added about 125 million people to the global count of those in poverty. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, that revision meant another 111 million people were considered extremely poor.
That's a major increase. Does it mean we're losing ground? Or is this more of a statistical adjustment?
The underlying trends didn't change much. The pace of poverty reduction slowed during the 2020s, and poverty is increasingly concentrated in fragile and conflict-affected areas. But with the new baseline, the UN's goal of getting global poverty below 3% by 2030 is now even less likely. Projections for 2025 are around 10%. That's about 808 to 831 million people.
So, most of those people are in sub-Saharan Africa and fragile states.
Yes. By 2025, more than 3/4 of the world's extreme poor will be in those regions. Sub-Saharan Africa's rate is around 45 to 46%. Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo stand out. By 2030, half of the world's extreme poor could live in just those two countries.
Why is it so difficult to reduce poverty in these places when other countries are making gains?
There are several reasons. Economic instability, slow recovery from COVID, climate shocks, and weak economic growth are all factors. Then there are big infrastructure gaps. Basic things like roads, electricity, schools. These are sometimes called fragility traps, where conflict and weak institutions make progress much harder.
And rural areas are affected the most.
Yes, absolutely. In sub-Saharan Africa, about 3/4 of people living in poverty are in rural areas. Child poverty is also a critical issue. Children are about 30% of the population, but they represent over half of the extremely poor.
So, what actually works to help the most vulnerable groups, especially children and women?
We need both broad and targeted efforts. Economic growth matters, but it has to be linked with investment in infrastructure, healthcare, education, and social protection. Take women's access to jobs, for example, especially in households where no one is earning. That can make a significant difference.
Are there any examples where targeted policies have shown real results?
Yes, conditional cash transfers, school feeding programs, and targeted health interventions have worked in several countries. But the challenge is scale. Plus, better data collection is needed. Right now, some countries only have partial coverage, which makes it hard to measure progress.
Given all this, is it realistic to expect poverty in these regions to be halved by 2030?
Only about 1 in 5 countries are currently on track to halve poverty by 2030. For most fragile and low-income countries, growth alone won't be enough. They'll need coordinated policies to address the effects of COVID, climate change, and persistent inequality. The World Bank is now using higher poverty lines for middle-income countries, $4.20 and $8.30 a day, to guide more tailored policy responses.
So, should we see the 80% global progress as hopeful or as a reminder of how much work is left?
It's both. The progress shows that coordinated efforts can work, but it's also a clear reminder that gains aren't shared equally. The main takeaway is that global numbers can hide deep local challenges.
Which brings us to the big question. Can the world's poorest actually benefit from this new wave of poverty reduction?
That's really the key challenge for the next decade.
We started this episode with the headline, 80% of countries are set to reduce poverty. Today, we've examined what that means, why the numbers have changed, and what might work for those still being left behind.
Thanks for joining us as we unpacked the data and looked at what's driving both global improvements and persistent gaps.
Thank you for listening. This episode was brought to you by mynews.studio. Try it now for free.